Hello, everyone. On the occasion of Indo-German Research Day, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you for today's panel discussion on gender equality in research, looking beyond gender parity. I'm Nimita Pandey, a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Policy Research, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Today's discussion would be focusing on examining diverse perspectives on how to mainstream gender equality in science education and research careers, and also to indicate different pathways to bridge gaps existing in the practice and process of science. We have today a stellar panel of experts for the discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A session wherein the audience can pose the questions to the panelists. We hope that today's insightful discussion will be a great learning for a diverse set of audience ranging from scholars, researchers, policy practitioners, engaging on issues of gender equality in STEM and STI. Before we move towards the panel discussion, I would like to just highlight a few housekeeping rules, which is very important considering the new normal we are living right now. So we would request everyone to keep their microphones muted when others are speaking, and please remember to switch it on while you speak. And for the audience, please use your chat box if you wish to ask a question during the panel discussion itself. We will circle back to you in the Q&A round. So without further ado, let's begin the panel discussion. And the first panelist I would like to invite today is Vivi Stavro, who is the Senior Science Officer of International Science Council. Welcome, Vivi. I would like to introduce Vivi to the audience, that she is also the Executive Secretary of the ISC Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science. Vivi is a clinical psychologist and development worker with extensive international experience and exposure in humanitarian emergencies and post-conflict situation. As a social development consultant, evaluator, and researcher, her expertise are very diverse, and she has worked with various stakeholders ranging from UN to development agencies, academic institutions, government ministries, and services. The areas she focuses on are child protection, mental health, psychosocial support, and health system development, health and human rights, to name a few. Welcome, Vivi. And as we begin the panel discussion, I would like to pose a question to you to kind of probe you to talk about a kind of perspective we look forward to hear from you. That is, as we know that gender equality in research is a global concern. It's not limited to a certain geography. Various countries and international organizations are making effort, and you also represent one of those organizations, in order to bring more women to research. To build over that aspect, it would be interesting to know from you what sort of fundamental shifts are required to mainstream gender equality in research. Over to you, Vivi. Vivi, you're muted. Yes, it's all right.
Classic mistake. So thank you, Nimita, and hello to everybody on the panel. I'm very happy to be here, and hello to everybody who is watching and going to participate. So, of course, I'm going to approach this from the lens of an international organization, and I'd like to start off first with something that is close to my heart, to my immediate day-to-day work. And one fundamental shift to think about women's participation in science is to think of it as a core issue for the free and responsible practice of science. Barriers to access science, to access scientific education, or to participate in scientific activity, and then barriers to benefit from the knowledge and products of science can be viewed as a human rights issue. We can take it from a right to science lens. I'm going to try and offer examples. These barriers come in many forms. So the ISC does fund research studies at a global level, taking a dive into looking at issues. So we funded research studies looking at the gender gap in science. I'm going to draw from the global approach to the gender gap in mathematical computing and natural sciences. And by the way, the examples that I'm going to draw from are all in documents in the ISC's booth at the virtual fair. So I encourage you to go there and find the resources. Now, this report shows that women's experiences in both educational and employment settings are consistently less positive than men's. Worryingly, more than a quarter of women's responses across the natural and social sciences report experiencing sexual harassment at university and work. Women are 14 times more likely than men to report being personally harassed, and consistently report less positive relationships with their doctoral advisors. Please go to the study. It backs everything up with a wealth of practical recommendations and also offers a huge repository of useful tools and resources. Now, ensuring access to scientific knowledge is a key scientific responsibility and intersects clearly with issues of social justice. And this leads us to another fundamental shift in framing our understanding and action in tackling gender inequity, which is intersectionality, and incorporating into our frameworks. Broadening the lens of gender equality policies and actions in research to intersections with other forms of discrimination, ethnic origin, religion, citizenship, language, political or other opinion, gender identity, etc. The principle of intersectionality gives us alternative ways of looking at gender and, of course, of taking in multiple worldviews. I believe that the growth of transdisciplinary research in academic science, now I come from, I'm a development worker, participatory practices in research is a very long tradition. Academic science has taken it up more recently seriously, is an important approach in developing a gender-inclusive research culture. I'm going to touch on a third fundamental shift. I view, I say this personally because it's, I view patriarchy as a central organizing principle in society. Challenging and overcoming such a deeply embedded system requires constant advocacy, vigilance, and solidarity. A pause in efforts invariably means taking many steps back. For example, not mainstreaming gender equity throughout intersecting systems in an organization can mean almost at a micro level that losing that one person constantly and strongly advocating for gender equality in your finance committee, in your research proposal evaluation panel, on your governing board, can rapidly degenerate into agenda and budgetary discrimination. An example from one of ISC's members, the International Mathematical Union, shows the importance of a systematic approach whereby focal points and programs for gender embedded equity have been embedded across structures and systems of the IMU, from the Committee for Women in Mathematics at the international level, boosted by a standing committee for gender equality in sciences that now involves 9 natural science unions, and at a national level, an ambassadors scheme that has grown beyond all expectations, from very few people to now 175 ambassadors in 99 countries. And importantly, the ambassadors have coalesced into regional committees to take different regional dynamics and linguistic zones into account. And often that regional perspective is missing from the way that we organize at the global level. So in terms of community development, this is a decentralized structure, but one that receives support, inadequately resourced, but nevertheless from the center. However, it's not easy. Scientific progress does not guarantee a better gender awareness and quality. Another study that we funded, coordinated by Gender Insight, Gender Equality in Science, looking at the participation of women in global science organization, a baseline study in 2015, over 120 organizations, and one in 2020, a nice international and interdisciplinary comparison, shows that women are vastly underrepresented. The gains between 2015 and 2020 are really small. And the underrepresentation, just to take academies, it also has disciplinary unions. The underrepresentation of female members of academies is greatest in the mathematical sciences, 8%, followed by the engineering sciences at 10%. I mean, I'm taking up time, but I also think another fundamental shift which researchers absolutely need to incorporate is one that spans the entire human life course, and not only looking at women after they attain their PhD, and very much the issue of allies, of male allies, and the fact, as for many underrepresented groups, women carry a significant burden in being compelled to spend our time advocating for our right to participate in research on top of our everyday professional activities, draining engagement in our other professional development opportunities, further favoring men. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivi. This is so very interesting, and I think it just sets the context for today's discussion in a very, very lucid way, I would say. I have a question, and we'll circle back, but I'll just reach out to other panelists and engage with them and try to seek their perspectives. So the next panelist is Antonia Leach, who is the head of Office for Equal Opportunities at Forschungszentrum Illich. Pardon me if I pronounce it wrongly. And she is a communication major and diversity and inclusion expert who has been the head of the Office for Equal Opportunities for almost 9 years. During her time, she has developed the office from a unit that mainly focused on family service to a very powerful executive department with a team of experts on diversity, inclusion, gender equality in research, and family service. She's also a spokesperson for Helmholtz Job and Family Network that includes family offices of 18 Helmholtz centers. So welcome, Antonia, and to probe you a little more and get into this discussion, I would like to pose a question to you. Well, gender biases and discriminations are witnessed across different career levels and trajectories. And now we are focusing on gender equality in research. And we see that institutions have a significant role to play in eliminating certain biases or discriminations related to gender. So according to you, what are some of the critical issues in research-related practices and processes that cause hindrance to develop a gender-inclusive research culture? Over to you.
Thank you, Nimita. As you mentioned, I'm coming from a German research institution that very strongly focuses on STEM. So that is also the perspective I'm coming from. So Vivi had this beautiful global outreach and perspective. I will focus on two specific issues we are currently dealing with, since there's just too much one could address. In my opinion, the greatest challenge we still face is that culturally a man dedicating his whole life to science is still stuck as the prototype of a successful scientist in too many heads, or in our heads. And this has an immense impact on our talent pool, who's chosen for leadership position, how resources are distributed, and the entire working culture that we are in. In 2020, we participated in a GenderNet study. One of the most important factors for a successful career in science is a strong network, as it provides opportunities and visibility. Opportunities as in job opportunities, promotions, information, access to projects and funding, and visibility as in access to conferences, but also accessibility of closed field-specific circles of experience and decision-making. So the GenderNet study was aiming to find out how informal networks shape careers and if those opportunities are gendered, and spoiler, of course they are, and very, very strongly so. So what they found out is that individual success of networking practices rely on the competence attributed to a person. The more competent I perceive a person to be, the more valuable that person is for my personal network. And of course, this is where stereotypes kick in and create gender-specific barriers, such as the historic bipolar connection between masculinity and technical affinity, and between femininity and technical incompetence, resulting in the fact that female STEM scientists are attributed with less competence along field-specific stereotypes. And needless to say, mothers on part-time not only have fewer time resources to invest into networking, but are also even attributed with way less competence. So all this results in female scientists having worse chances to build a strong network, and therefore less opportunities and visibility, and in the end, a lot less resources to rely on. So this is one study we participated in and worked on. Another study we are currently participating in is the UNISAFE project. UNISAFE is a EU-funded project that aims to produce better knowledge of gender-based violence and sexual harassment in research performing organizations. This knowledge is then translated into operation tools for higher education, research organizations, and policymakers. UNICEF is right now conducting qualitative and quantitative studies in more than 45 research institutions across Europe, and therefore is one of the largest databases and largest studies of that kind. So this database is, as I said, the first in the European research sector, and of such a great importance as research organizations are prone to create conditions for hierarchies of power where gender-based violence occurs, as in any other institutions, but as we experience it feels like it's even harder to address those issues in our organizations. So those are two issues that we're currently working on and do play a major role in the still occurring inequality for female scientists in STEM.
Thank you, Antonia. I think this gives a more institutional perspective where we are, where there's a lot of requirement to reform the institutions, particularly science institutions, and how those insightful studies give you evidence in order to go back and revisit the policies at institution level where the gap exists. So this is very brilliantly put by you, and thank you so much. Again, these all things are triggering me to ask many questions to the panelists, but we'll wait, we'll hold on and move to our third panelist, Dr. Bhavani Rao. Welcome, Dr. Bhavani. And a short introduction to Dr. Bhavani. She's a director of AMMACHI Lab, and she's also the UNESCO Chair in Gender Equality and Women Empowerment, which is located within Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, a top-ranked private university in India. She is also heading the Center for women's empowerment and gender equality within the university. And she's the Dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Science, and she's Director of Skill Development within Amritsar program. She has been designated as India's only UNESCO chair in gender equality and has extensive experience in technology-based women empowerment projects from rural India, which are supported by different international and national agencies. She has been the author of more than 100 publications and numerous patents related to vocational skills and haptics, and has received various awards, including the 50 Education Innovative Leaders in 2019. So welcome, Professor Bhavani, and I invite you to the panel discussion with a question that while we have been discussing that there is underrepresentation of women in science research, and it is, as I said earlier also, it's a worldwide issue and it's not just related to one country. However, we believe that there has to be a contextual lens required, particularly for developing country, and because they have their own set of challenges in order to promote women in science. So according to you, how one should look up to these challenges and what should be the pathways to overcome these challenges, particularly in light of the ongoing discussion on open science and open access? So over to you, Professor Bhavani.
Thank you, Nimita, for the wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, and to the co-panelists and the audience. This is a passion area of mine, so I can talk a lot, but I will touch upon the most important thing that you said, and also following up is the same kind of point that was also raised by both our previous speakers, is that the importance of a context-based understanding of the problem that we have at hand. Coming to India, it's very interesting to see the amount of research that is done on gender-related issues in India. When you look at the world, compared to what the world does, is less than 2%. So we don't actually really even know what is going on in a gender perspective in our own country, let alone translate it to active programs in science. And of course, the word participatory comes up. So I think there's a very strong need for the social scientists to be talking to our scientists, our traditional scientists, on this dialogue. So any intervention requires both these voices hand in hand. If the engineers and the scientists just design programs for promoting women in science, it's not going to really fly without a very strong background of research on the social aspects of why women are not taking up these programs. At the same time, if the social scientists don't really talk and really engage with the scientists themselves, it's not a complete dialogue. And this is, I think, one of the largest gaps, especially when it comes to India, in the amount of research that we're actually doing in terms of gender equality. Huge gap. Second thing is, I'm just throwing points out with respect to India. In Indian universities, just when we're talking about leadership, and I think this is again another very important point that one of the panelists brought up, less than 7%, I think 6-point-something% of Indian universities actually are led by women. Now, I don't know what the world metrics are. We may be doing better than other countries in the world, but nevertheless, the fact that only 6% of Indian universities are headed by women, there itself, you start the trend from there. I'm proud to be a part of a university that is led by a woman, so I think that makes a huge difference in what our priorities are. But I think it would be really nice to see a lot more women as chancellors, as vice chancellors of universities. Third thing is, how are higher education institutions really ranked in terms of gender equality? If they are ranked more by metrics that basically talk about how the institution functions and not necessarily how it's is how they embody maybe these values. Are you taking enough number of scientists and all? But they don't really look at how the institution actually supports the larger ecosystem of bringing about gender equality. And I think that is a very important thing. Yes, we contribute in terms of research, but we should also contribute in terms of a transformation in society. And this is something that I feel should be as a metric, that is something as a very important metric of how these institutions are held accountable in terms of gender equality. Very specifically coming into higher education and open science and open research, there's just so many things at so many levels. We need to really look into the nitty-gritties of open science and open access. Costs tend to be quite prohibitive, even for access, and publishing can be an expensive affair. If there could be for new scientists, especially among women, if there could be promotional incentives that are given to help them at least step into the publishing world, this is something that would be it could be something that is transformative. And another point which I think Antonia touched upon is, and I think also Vivi also pointed out, is the importance of social mentor networks for women in science. We don't really have, I think in the US there is something that is called a sorority house or something. So how do men work, right? They have these clubhouses of social networks that help each other in promoting, or, oh, I know this person and I can bring them on, and the trust factor. So we don't really have within our institutions that kind of a social network that is dedicated to science. Indeed, for anything, but the topic is science, and this translates to everything. And if we could promote those social networks as a mandatory part of every institution, I think that would be another way to really support women in sciences. And again, the idea of opening up the network, not that it should be an exclusive club, but that should be open and easy access for every woman who is in the science education in higher education institutions. But most important is also promoting this culture of science. What comes in. So the universities are fed by an ecosystem, right? So who comes into the universities? It's important that we attack that also. Is you encourage the entry into science, then sustaining them in science becomes the next problem. For that, we really have to promote a culture of science, but it's all glitzy right now. So we tend to promote like the greats of science and the great women in science, and that should be there because they are role models. But science, we need to demystify it. It's not something that is so beyond that we have to reach. It is something that we have lived with for all our lives, and women have participated in this all our lives. So we need to see how science has been a part of a woman's culture and being all along. We're not trying to say, oh, you have a brain and you may want to try and use it. It's something we've been doing all along. It's that recognition and that understanding that women are not new to science, and they have been practitioners and researchers and promoters of science in ways that we have not necessarily quantified. This is something that I feel, because that can change the mindset of people coming into science. And then, of course, you have all the things that you need to put into place to sustain and then promote them later. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Bhavani. I think in the first round of discussion, there's a lot of discussion around access to science and how we are trying to promote transdisciplinary research, dialogue between science and social science, broadening the boundaries for science to make it more inclusive in nature, particularly when we talk about gender, and the existing issues which are very much embedded because we are not doing all this. So it's a very interesting discussion happening. And as I said, let's do another round just to follow up on what you have said. So I'll begin with Vivi, and maybe this round will be a little quick because I could see we have questions floating around. So we will give more time to the audience to kind of engage with the panelists. I'll be facilitating the questions, but however, they are the ones posing it. And I would request the audience, please, please pour in your questions in the chat box, and we are welcoming all sort of questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. So, Vivi, as you talked about access to science and the idea of intersectionality, I think it is very much embedded with the idea of the rights-based agenda of science. And so I wanted to ask about it, as you mentioned, that which is more about right to do science and access to science. Well, it intrigues me to ask that what sort of practices, basically promising practices, one should look up to in order to understand this idea. So it would be great if you could suggest some practices which people in the audience could relate to and kind of think of when they are looking at policies and practices in their institutions. Over to you.
Thank you. First to say that taking a rights-based agenda for access to science, although not a new concept in terms of international conventions, declarations, is little explored by the science world. It's contentious and has only recently been taken up. So let me start from an ISC perspective. So the International Science Council, and all our members have signed up for this, is committed to the vision of science as a global public good. And I think that has profound implications for the ways in which science is conducted, how it is used, and the role it plays in society. And our position paper is in that resource, in those resources. So broadly defined, natural, social, engineering, medical sciences have played a vital role in human history. Researchers are key members of contemporary society. So the right to share in and benefit from advances of science and technology is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These rights go hand in hand with responsibilities, and those responsibilities are, in terms of research, are both in the practice, the management, and the communication of scientific research. So the concepts of scientific freedom and responsibility relate directly to human rights and social justice from our perspective. So the human rights-based approach to science and technology seeks to place a concern for human rights at the heart of how the international community engages with urgent global challenges. It recognizes that science is socially organized. It's a human activity which is value-laden, shaped by time, historical period, by organizational structures and processes. And it asks how governments and other stakeholders, the human rights language, can create and implement policies to ensure safety and health, livelihoods, people's needs and priorities, and economic and social development, environmental strategies, and how people participate in decision-making that affects their lives and resources. It takes a normative stance, and it has a transformative agenda. That doesn't sit easily within the science community. And also it's the human rights-based approach is not without its critics. A powerful critic comes from feminist scholars, development theorists, and policymakers in the global South, who emphasize the Eurocentric and Western origins of human rights and how they clash and can be used to subjugate other worldviews. So just to say that, in terms of moving from high-level statements to concrete principles, I'd like to highlight, and here I think you all know this program and there are lots of opinions around it, is the Unesco STEM and Gender Advancement Program, SAGA, which identifies tools and recommends possible promising practices to offer governments and policymakers a variety of tools to help reduce the gender gap in science. It's a huge repository, data repository, super useful. I encourage people to look at it. A concrete example of progress at a country at the national level is from the Gambia in West Africa, where the government reviewed the existing national STI policy considering the recommendations from the saga and created a gender unit within the Gambian Ministry of Higher Education and STI, and then strengthened the existing units in higher education institutions in the country. I mean, that's high level. It's great, the policies are there. The operationalization is where our rights come alive. So a bit of a broad brush. Thanks.
No, thank you, Vivi. I think we don't have that much time to go deeper, and I think all these information is available on the net and on different resources, and people could visit them to read more about it. But this is very interesting about how African countries like Gambia, how they are coming forward and making efforts. And I mean, there are efforts in India, and of course, maybe Professor Bhavani would also talk about it when we come to her. But before that, I was more intrigued to ask Antonia when she was discussing about different biases and discriminations and the different studies they have been a part of. So, Antonia, my follow-up question to you is, as you talked about different gender insensitive and discriminatory research cultures that exist within an institution. So, drawing from your own experience, could you please suggest us how one could overcome such kind of challenges within the institutions? Because it's very, very serious, though from the aerial view of it, it looks like a very trivial issue, but it makes a huge lot of difference and create a lot of barrier for women to participate in science. Over to you.
Yeah, and I'm again coming back to a very organizational perspective. And what I'm going to talk about is that in the end, it's totally trivial and a huge effort. As we know that we cannot eradicate gender biases, we have to work on reducing the effects they have. So what we need to do is we need to reach every single employee and make them aware of the biases each one of us has, and especially those employees with decision-making responsibilities. As long as we have the structural inequalities that we do have, it might also be helpful to support female scientists in their, in quotas, survival strategies. But this is a very sensitive issue because in my experience, a lot of female scientists do not want to be addressed as female scientists and participate in specific programs addressed for them, which I can totally understand since the problem is an organizational or a cultural problem more than, or not an individual problem at all. And to get into real, or our effort for real change are also outreach programs. What we do is, of course, we take a look at our pipeline. We take a look at what role models we put out there, how accessible we communicate ourselves to be to a diverse target group. And we also do outreach programs for young children, for them to be able to make a constant positive experience with STEM issues and to then enable the access there. So in the end, it's education and training of every single person in the organization, holding them accountable, setting clear goals, having them feel responsible for the mutual goal we want to achieve. Where also quotas, of course, play a big role, and be transparent, be clear about the processes, but also our shortcomings on the way. And of course, this is ongoing. This will never be done and finished, but we'll have to tackle that every single time we take a look at a new process or we want to address single project issues, processes in the organization.
Thank you, Antonia. And what I could draw is that, as you said, that a lot of things depends on capacity building, as what we are discussing, and awareness and sensitization embedded to that idea. And also that the idea of gender equity has to be within the subtext of every process and policies, because if it is not the core value, then we are just not fulfilling the idea of mainstreaming gender equality in research. Thank you so much for that. And with this, we move to Professor Bhavani. Since I was very intrigued because you talked about, broadening the universe of science and research, and you highlighted different ideas within that of how we could make it more gender inclusive. So could you please share some examples, Professor Bhavani, or some practices in this regard, which could be more beneficial to developing countries? Over to you.
So, like I ended the previous thing is part of it is demystifying the science, because I really believe that women have been involved in science through the ages, whether in terms of understanding. I think the best example would be women's knowledge of plants and medicines that are plant-based. This is scientific knowledge, and women always were the ones that really held this knowledge. Whether in India and the West, they were probably burnt at stake at some point of time because they were deemed witches. But in India, they flourish, and today they still do flourish. The kind of remedies and the kind of knowledge of, you go out into your garden, you can pick up a couple of leaves, and you know how to treat a particular ailment. It's a very deep knowledge of your ecosystem that has never been formalized as science. A scientist tomorrow comes and does the same study and publishes a paper and gets recognition and awards. And why is it that these ancient knowledge traditions are not really reflected back into the world of science? And I think if you look for those stories of science that come from everyday life, you will really be able to transform the number of women who are participating in science to begin with. And also to demystify science as not something that's a new construct that has been introduced. It's something that's just been around all the time. And there are ample stories from our history where women have been metallurgists, they have devised new kinds of alloys. These are stories, but you find practitioners of these that are still nested in communities, and especially indigenous communities. We're talking about participatory research. Why aren't we listening to those voices? Why aren't we acknowledging that they have science too? This is one thing that I feel is it's really left out. And the other thing which is not really about expanding the universe of science and the definitions of science, it's a slightly different point, but I would really like to touch upon it because I think it came up in one of the chat windows, is we are not addressing the elephant in the room. Is the family. This is where things really fall apart when it comes to that. You can put everything in its place. Why is a family only a woman's commitment? It should be a unit. Father, the mother, the child, or the partners and the children, it should be considered a unit, and the responsibility falls squarely on the family as a unit and not as individual. Are we putting the right processes in our institutions to consider the family as a unit? Are we allocating that time or insisting that that should be something that has its own agenda, it has its own right, its own responsibility? We know the effects of neglecting that also. So there are enough women who also are reflecting back, this is something that you can't afford to neglect. This is something that came out in COVID. So many women don't want to go back to work. Why? They understand the importance of being around for the family, and I'm sure that the men can take up just as much responsibility for it. Maybe our institutions should actually push a little bit on that. That's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Professor Bhavani. I mean, the two ideas which you kind of implanted in this discussion was how important it is to recognize the value of indigenous knowledge, and particularly when women predominantly in developing countries are the agents who kind of embody the indigenous knowledge. So it's time to recognize and do a lot of unlearning and relearning in order to understand that they are also doing science. And of course, the whole idea of considering family a unit, and for all institutions to understand that one has to think beyond the idea of what they are doing at different institutions and demystify also the gender stereotypes and the gender roles which we have created within the society. It's high time to go revisit and sit together and try to figure out a way where we could think about how to make the society at large gender inclusive. And then, of course, the science would itself take a course in that. Thank you so much for your insightful suggestions, comments, and perspectives. With this, we close the panel discussion. However, the discussion is still on, and we move to the Q&A. And I could see questions are moving in. And without wasting time, because I don't want the organizers to be upset that, we are running out of time, I'll quickly move to the first question. So I'll go in the order as the questions have appeared in the chat box for me. So this question is from Mr. Pankaj, and he is very curious to know that are there any networking avenues for researchers and innovators presently in academia? So I believe he is an assistant professor in civil engineering, and he is, I don't want to talk about his age, but he has been working in the area of sustainable development, and he has gained a lot of experience in that. So his idea is more about the network and different platforms or avenues for the opportunities. But I'm not sure he's focusing on gender, but we can focus on gender. And in general, also, we can talk about some of the networks. So I would open the platform if you want to, whosoever wants to opt for it, because this question I cannot really target an audience, one of the panelists. Yes. Vivi, would you like to? You have to unmute yourself.
The person is asking what avenues are available to enter into the academies.
Yeah, for networks, basically for networking, what avenues are there in for researchers and innovators in academia? So academic institutions. So are there networks for academic institutions? What he meant through that, yeah.
I can't answer at the institutional level. Mm-hmm. I would encourage people to look at avenues within their disciplines, and also avenues that cut across disciplines, importantly. Unions and associations. And remember that science is not only in the academy. There are other, within civil society, also within governments, there's a vibrant research community.
Right. I think maybe he talks about sustainability and sustainable development, and I think the UN system itself provides a lot of platform, and also the different kind of consortia that have come across. So it's just that you have to reach out to people and connect with them and showcase your research interest, and you'll find friends in the community to work together. So the next question is more specific to women, and it says, I believe Vivi referred to that how to see the life cycle of a woman's life throughout her career trajectory or say her education. But I would open this question to others also to kind of give their views, is what kind of support system is there for women researchers during different stages of life cycle? And because very well, the audience, the person explains that, for someone in their early 20s or 30s, their requirements are very different. They are in their very early form of their career and they have to build themselves, but also they are engaging with family responsibilities of children and elderly care. So many are unable to commit to their PhDs or say postdocs and for their early career research assignments. But then in 40s and 50s, the challenges don't end. it still continue? Like maybe it could be health issues or overburdened by family responsibilities, and it goes on and on. So what kind of support systems are required at different level? And I think we need to have different levels and different kinds of support systems, which I could understand. So maybe one could briefly touch upon highlighting the support systems. Yeah.
I mean, just to say that at the ISC, now the ISC is fairly new. It brought together the natural and the social sciences, and two old organizations came together. A huge gap in funding, in scholarships, is for mid-career scientists. And we advocate quite strongly and work, and it's, as I said, this is a permanent advocacy for financial opportunities for mid-career scientists to continue their work. And as was brought up by Professor Rao, the COVID pandemic has just really illustrated clearly the impact on women researchers working from home, and the difficulties of pursuing their career.
Thank you, Vivi. If Antonia or Professor Bhavani would like to add on to this.
Yeah, I would like to add maybe a slightly radical point of view, but it'll facilitate thinking anyway. So even if people disagree, that's fine. If it can provoke some thought, it would be good. I think there's a fundamental thing that is wrong is we are looking as a world as the way is for infinite growth. And I think we should move from infinite growth to optimal growth, whether it's in terms of career or it's in terms of how much money you make. When you actually switch to optimal growth, then the amount that you're going to push yourself in any one place is going to be limited. You will distribute it between what is important in your life. Unfortunately, that the way the world is working right now, we have only one goal and we're just going for it, and it's not sustainable. This is a rudimentary problem that we have. And I think, again, this is why I brought up the point is we need to consider the household as a unit. There should be something which is an optimal growth, and there will be trade-offs. You cannot have it all. You just have to let go of the idea that you're going to have it all. You make compromises and you move things together for the benefit of everybody, humans and the environment, and that shift has to happen within all of us. That's right.
Thank you, Professor Bhavani. I think it is thought-provoking, and as you said, that people may agree to disagree, but I agree, and I think we are here to discuss settling and unsettling issues. So it's great that we are talking all this on this platform. So I'll quickly hop on to the next question. If Antonia, is it okay? Shall we hop on to the next question? Great. So a question has come from Ian. So he is a professor in the field of engineering, and he is trying to highlight an issue of funding, which leads to the dropout for many female PhDs, like who are involved in childcare or maternity or family responsibility. They drop out, and that often the 1/3 funding runs out. So how is there a possibility to support these women financially in Germany or in other countries so that they could finish their work? So Antonia, do you have any idea about this? And then we take it forward from there.
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that, but it's not funding specific. Since my experience, at least for our organization, the greater challenge isn't so much the funding. That might be different for universities in Germany, but the great challenge is that we do see an immense leak in the pipeline at that point of the career, and which is what Professor Rao mentioned before, that at least in cis heteronormative relationships, most of the care work falls back on the woman. And in that sense, in Germany, all the studies say that we do not see a retraditionalization through Corona, but we see how traditional our system still is. More than that, we had a real backlash there. what we as an organization are trying to tackle and have done so for a long time, and I believe rather successfully, is that we make fatherhood very visible. We have a network for fathers. We have a lot of activities specific for fathers that promote an active fatherhood, since this is also a stereotype that falls back on our male scientists, that they did not always make transparent that in their life there's more than science, and that caretaking can also be something they actively bring into the job and discuss. A challenge we face is that the processes where it's decided who's going to take how much time for childcare take place in the families, a lot of times even before the child is there. And that is, of course, and rightly so, a space we cannot enter. So what we do is we try to encourage, we try to educate, again, our employees there. But we do not have really good solutions how to really support them effectively in building a partnership in a care system.
Okay, I think it somehow touches that the whole idea of funding may not arise if we kind of resolve these issues. So it kind of touches upon remotely, but I think it's very much aligned with the thought. So as I have been indicated by the organizers, we have like 4 minutes to rush through. I'll ask a quick question, maybe a minute for Professor Bhavani, because there is a question about how do we connect science and social science? You have been discussing on that. So maybe just quick 1, 2, 3 from your side. Yeah. And then we move towards the end. Yeah.
This is my pet subject. Yeah. So connecting science and social science is something that is in our university. It's almost mandatory, because all research is supposed to be for societal good, and that's the university mandate. So everything that you do, even if you're building a technology, you always involve a social scientist, so that you know that whatever you're building, you're creating, is for the benefit of the whole. And this is how it's almost mandatory for every scientist who's doing research at Amrita to be linked with somebody from the social sciences who's looking at everything from a social science perspective. And this is something, it's because our mandate is compassion-driven research. And so what it translates will definitely benefit society. It definitely benefits women, the environment, and society as well. So that's kind of how we bring them together.
Thank you. So we are 3 minutes to go, and I think we could wrap up the discussion. So the discussion was very illuminating for me in person, someone who works on gender science. And I think the audience at large also gained a lot. There's so much to go back and read and reflect on. So thank you to everyone, particularly our distinguished panelists who gave their valuable time and brought out lovely perspectives on gender equality in research. Before we end, I would like to say to those audience whose questions were not taken, please don't be disheartened. We will ensure that these questions reach to the panelists and they respond to these questions, and we will try to rewrite to all the participants who have engaged on the chat box and shared questions. Thanks to the German Center for Research and Innovation for giving us this opportunity and this platform for all of us to have this kind of a dialogue. And I think we need more such platforms to have such kind of dialogues. Thank you to the audience for investing their time, their energy, and being with us for this engaging discussion. And let's take this discussion forward beyond the screen in our own communities, in our own science institutions. So we look forward to listening from all of you, and the event is going on. Please join different panel discussions, the fair, and other activities which are going on under on the occasion of the Indo-German Research Day. So thank you so much. Have a great day.